politicians actually are for the people. They're about themselves. I want to bring that back to show people. I'm a firm believer that if you want change, you got to be the change that you want to see. When you're military, you're not really looked on the inside. You don't look on the military helping the citizens here. We were more worried about the threats overseas. Public service, especially in the political realm, is about self-gratification, self-promoting, greed, corruption. I believe that I'm good enough to compete on the merits of my resume, who I am, not based upon the color of my skin. More government means less success in your life. Less government means more independent, and you're doing more. Are you doing better, or you're having a more successful life? I think that's what most Americans are wanting to see from their politicians, is just the basics of morals and values more so than hard work. Be the leader you're supposed to be. Do the right thing when nobody's looking.
I am your host, Gaurav Garg. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to an exclusive interview with a visionary leader, David Winkler, a passionate advocate and Republican Congressional Candidate for Pennsylvania's 4th District. David brings a wealth of experience from his diverse career, encompassing roles as a combat veteran, former law enforcement officer, and CEO dedicated to serving and advocating for his community. With over 15 years of service within the Department of Defense, David served honorably as a U.S. Marine Corps infantryman and later as U.S. Army Air Defense Artilleryman. His commitment to public service extended further as he safeguarded the city of Murfreesboro, Tennessee for 2.5 years as a police officer, upholding principles of integrity and dedication. David's dedication to veteran welfare materialized as a founding and leadership of Wings of Warrior, a non-profit organization that positively impacted thousands of veterans nationwide, addressing critical issues like healthcare benefits, education, and employment. His exemplary leadership earned him international business accolades as CEO and president of the organization. An advocate for conservative values, David is an active member of Flexit and Lexit, empowering minorities by fostering an understanding of conservative principles. As a political commentator for Black Conservative Talk and Hardline Politics, he shares his values, insights on current national affairs and political matters. It's a pleasure to welcome Mr. David to our show, Amazing Mentor. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite. I'm really happy to be here. So let's do this.
My pleasure, sir. And thank you for accepting our invite, sir.
No problem.
So, how did your childhood experience foster the values of integrity, honor, and compassion that you prioritize in your professional life today?
Just to give you a little background about me, I grew up in foster care and was adopted out of it. So not a normal traditional route where you had a normal childhood where mom and dad had raised you. I started off in the state system. And I think being adopted kind of shaped my mind into eventually of how I'd be today, which I see it as America is great. To be able to go from that state system to being adopted to a loving family, and then being able to be raised with traditional values and discipline and all the great stuff that helped me become successful today. So yeah, I think that experience itself it shapes who I am today.
Yeah. Any specific movies or role model during your formative years that ignited your passion for creativity and innovation?
There's a lot of role models that I looked up. Through sports, you had people like Jackie Robinson, broke the racial barrier, played for the Brooklyn Dodgers before the Dodgers moved over to LA. So back in the Negro Leagues and that aspect, I looked up to those leaders like that, as well as Dr. King. I also looked up to Frederick Douglass. It's one of the reasons why I'm a Republican. Obviously, you guys know who Frederick Douglass is. As well as I looked up to military leaders. There was a lot I grew up with my dad being Navy, as well as working in the air defense realm with Raytheon. I really looked up to people like General Patton, Eisenhower, Chesty Puller, and a few others that I was always told stories about. So that kind of is one of the reasons why I went down the military route, because I looked up to a lot of those leaders, as well as I played baseball. So yeah, I think that the way that I look at it, a lot of those role models and mentors is the reason why I became a role model / mentor to go help out others, because I think that is pivotal and key to children's success in the future, is to have positive role models to look up to. So yeah, those are just a few of them.
So can you share any particular childhood memory that you believe had lasting impact on your mindset and approach to challenges?
I think once again is being an adopted minority kid with two white parents. That was a unique experience. I'm living in Orange County, California, and I think their values is something that I will always remember. I think one of the childhood memories that I remember the most is being able to go out and see other cultures. My dad took us around the world, so I got to go live in Canada, go to school there for preschool through about first grade, and then high school I was in Ireland. So it was kind of got to go all over the world and experience. That will always be the memory I have, is being able to do what most people can't do before the age of 18, is go to France, go to Belgium, go to Germany, go to Asia, go experience everything, be able to have a widened and more broad perspective on issues going on around the world.
So in what ways did your early education contribute to shaping your diverse interest and eventual career path?
I think, being able to go to school in different countries, being able to experience different cultures while you're over there opens up your eyes to different outlooks besides the westernized American perspective on things. As I said, when I lived in Ireland, I remember having an interesting conversation, and they were like, in America, you guys focus on things in terms of white, black, or white versus black. But over here, we look at things at Catholic, Protestant. And I was like, we go back and forth with it, where I was like, you guys don't really see or experience the race stuff. They're like, no, we don't really care. And so I was just to be able to have more to those experiences, to be like, oh, okay. Also on top of that, I got to play sports that I usually wouldn't be able to play. I played cricket before, where I was like, I had no idea what cricket was until I went over to Europe, and I know that was a pretty cool experience. I had no idea what I was doing because I played baseball, so it was kind of interesting to hold the stick the opposite way. And then as well as I played rugby, which I thought that was pretty cool. And then the food was always something that I valued. It was like everywhere I went, I would always try new things. But I think that kind of just all together, all the cultural experiences that I learned from visiting each of these places, kind of made a newfound perspective and love for pretty much all cultures around. I think because the United States, we're a melting pot, that it's one of the most beautiful countries, but you still got to go over to other countries to experience it firsthand, rather than just taking the American perspective. And I think it's what made me who I am today, pretty much, is being able to say, hey, I've been to these countries. I've seen and experienced what they've experienced. And it helps me also tackle world issues on that stage, to say, hey, we may not need to look at this from an American perspective, but I've been over there to say, hey, this is actually the real issues, let's say in the Middle East, what they're facing over there, or Asia, what they're facing over in, say, Japan, Korea, or things like that. So I can put it all together, if you understand.
If you were only in United States and not in diverse part of the globe, what difference do you feel your life would have been?
I think that I would have a very sheltered opinion. I think that, and that's what we kind of face now in a lot of American politics, is a lot of people have never really gone out of their own state, let alone out of their country, to really kind of understand the issues at hand. And it kind of gives you a sheltered one way to look at it, rather than, okay, I've been over in those countries, I've experienced what they're experiencing, I've sat down with leaders to understand, hey, what the America thinks of a lot of different issues. I can give you examples for all day on this, but it's in America. We live in this, I would say, in this idea that complacency is the easiest way to put it, that we feel we're protected. The wolf isn't coming at our door here. We can sleep at night knowing that our country's safe and all that stuff. There's a lot of countries over there overseas that is not like that. Even our poor people that are here aren't the same kind of poor as some of the countries I've been to around the world, where I was walking around in the Middle East, and I come across villages that didn't really have anything, but they would give us everything off their back. And I would be like, no, keep the stuff. Let me bring water or food to you. Or to see kids in these war-torn places and they're absolutely happy. But our kids over here aren't happy, and they got iPhone 12s or whatever the new one is, and iPads. And I would think I would be sheltered, or I would be complacent, to feel like, and I would do the stuff that you see today, where I'd probably be one of those social justice funds that are running around and saying we're all oppressed, but they don't know what oppression is. And I'm going to be quite honest. The United States, you're not oppressed. But over in some of these countries, I'm like, yes, you definitely are experiencing real world oppression. So I think, to answer your question, is I think I'd be very sheltered if I only had an American experience.
Did you have any mentor or influencer during your adolescence who guided your aspiration or provided values insight into your future endeavors?
Yeah, my dad. I think that's one of the biggest things that we need to talk about again is the absence of fatherhood is what has a lot of these problems here in America. And I think that one of the biggest role models I can point to is my dad being the absolute epitome of a role model. 2 PhDs, highly educated. He went back and got a Juris Doctorate when I was a kid for God knows why. I will never spend that amount of years in school like he did. But just being there, even when he got off of work, which would be putting in long hours as one of the heads of Raytheon, he would still make sure that he had time to play with us, time to take us out. You could see the wear and tear on my dad, but that's the role model that I would really, truly look up to. Not only that, but in the sense where he adopted 6 kids, took them all out of really bad situations and brought them into his home to raise them as if they had the kids himself. But yeah, I mean, I would always say my dad before it is my favorite role model.
So considering your childhood dreams and ambitions, how closely does your current reality align with those real visions?
I think I'm almost there, but I'm not there yet. Like, I think that I've done everything I've ever thought of being or playing or when I was a kid. You know, like when you're a kid and you're running around and you're playing cops and robbers. Well, I was a cop. You run around and act like you were in the military. Well, I did 2 branches of military. I served in the Marines and the Army. I think now it's more taking that servant style leadership, taking that mentorship I have, and really carrying out the words that's in our Constitution of we the people. I think that that's what we've gotten away from, but I want to be that leader for Americans and really the politicians to follow my example. I feel like we've gotten away from a time frame where politicians actually are for the people. They're about themselves. I want to bring that back to show people you can really have faith in DC again, where you're going to have somebody like me put you before politics. And I think I'm not there yet until I get elected, where I can show the people that there is hope still in leaders in DC. So I'm saying that I'm not there. And I don't think I'll ever feel like I'm. And it's mainly because I don't think you can perfect or you can ever master the art of mentorship or leadership or anything. You're always working on ways to better yourself. And I think that that's always going to be something in me to say, hey, I don't feel like I'm there, So I'm always going to be trying to self-improve.
So can you highlight a defining moment in your military service that significantly impacted your approach to leadership and advocacy?
I think it's a combination of what I faced on the battlefields of Fallujah and Helmand Province, Afghanistan. And then coming back to America, having to deal with the ugly side of invisible wounds that led to a lot of my brethren unfortunately committing suicide, and seeing the systems and the institutions not help out veterans that you sent forward go fight the wars, but they didn't take care of them on the back end. And I think that was the defining experience that impacted my approach to leadership and advocacy, because we should be taking care of our veterans before a lot of things that are. I think that I would put veterans first. That's just me, because they were less than 1% of Americans that raised their right hand and they fought in a war, in a time of a war. And I find it disrespectful not to take care of these veterans that literally are safeguarding the Constitution, American way of life, and just the American people. So I think that realizing the issues that we face with invisible wounds, it really struck a chord with me to say, hey, this was something I was going to go down, and I felt like it was a new form of a mission. Like there was a battlefield at home that needed to be tackled here with the bureaucracy, red tape, politicians, and all that stuff to take care of our own after the war was done.
So how did your experience as a police officer in Murfreesboro, Tennessee contributes to your understanding of community needs and the challenging facing law enforcement today?
I became a police officer purely because of what was happening within social justice. I'm a firm believer that if you want change, you got to be the change that you want to see. I wanted to understand the problem as well from both sides of the coin by becoming a police officer. It's easy for people to run their mouth with Black Lives Matter and all these other things going on nowadays. But are you willing to put yourself in that position to be the change is like the ultimate thing, right? So I became, and I think it totally changed my opinion about because it's not easy to be that officer. It's not easy to be in those situations. It's not easy to be in shoot, don't shoot scenarios. It's not easy to be in situations of escalation of force. It's not even easy to approach somebody's window and give them a tick. But I will say you really learn a lot about how a city functions and where the downfalls of municipality government is, or where the gaps are in the sense of relations between police and the community. And you kind of become that individual problem solver as a police officer, because you have a lot of discretion. So how you go about your day-to-day operations as a police officer can make or break the opinion or attitude from the community. And I learned that very quick, that you don't have to be one of those officers that is by the book. I'm going to give everybody a ticket. You can use discretion and be like, you know what? I understand. Hey, here's a verbal warning. Go about your day or whatever. Or just go down to the local store, say hello to people, or just be this community leader. At the time I was an officer, I coached baseball. I was always out in the community giving back to it, whether it was handing out food during food drives to homeless, or every time I would see my homeless out there in the streets, I would stop and actually give them clothes and give them stuff that they need. They were just like really shocked, because they're like, usually police officers tell me to get out from underneath the bridge, or they tell me to go somewhere, but you're actually handing me food and checking up on me to make sure I'm all right. And as I said, this is where you get to use that authority figure position for good. Not always being the bad guy that walks up to your window and is like, hey, here's a speeding ticket, but actually learning how to engage as a police officer. So that was the takeaway.
So what prompted you to establish Wings for Warriors, and what were the most rewarding aspects of leading this non-profit organization?
I didn't exactly establish the organization. My founder was my foreman. And for those who don't know what a foreman is, he's a medic in the... It was actually a really, really bad day. So this actually goes back to Afghanistan of why this was established. We were on an offensive operation, and one of my Marines, unfortunately, he got killed stepping on an IED. And my corpsman ran around a minesweeper, and he ended up becoming an amputee because he stepped on an IED. Well, he went through 32 plus surgeries, went through the whole system back here in the United States that failed as going through all the rehabilitation. And so he created the organization to help out veterans tackle and navigate the system's medical, psychological care, TBI, PTSD kind of stuff, as well as where to find all these resources. So he created all that. And I think what prompted me was I didn't see my foreman after he got, taken off the battlefield. And this is back in 2008 timeframe. I didn't see him again until 2014. So I'm in the middle of New York City, and I'm doing a color guard event where I'm actually holding the flag, and I'm doing a stand up for heroes event. And out in the audience, I had no idea, but he was sitting in the audience. So I'm up on stage holding the flag up. Kind of hear this, all these people, these people like yell at me. They're like, oh, dude, whatever, right? So afterwards, I go to the green room, and I see this individual like coming out and trying to like push his way past the security, being like, hey, it's David, whatever. And I was like, let him through. I was like, that's that. And I finally recognized who it was. I was like, that's my foreman. I haven't seen him in forever. And so we reconnected there. We had a conversation, over some food and all that. And he was like, I really need help in this space. And like, you'd be a good advocate. So I said, hey, why not? I'll see what you have going on. I ended up becoming the chairman for him first. And we did a whole lot of work that year. We got out there and we helped out thousands of veterans from across the United States. I led the front on trying to work on that Mission Act, the Veterans Choice Act, to allow veterans to go outside of the VA to go and get health care. I helped out with that Blue Water Act to help Vietnam veterans get retroactive disability pay for things like Agent Orange and the pesticides that were out there, and worked on, new ways to diagnose and treat TBI or traumatic brain injury. But yeah, that's pretty much, if it wasn't for that chance meeting of him again in New York, I think that would have been, I wouldn't have been a Wings for Warrior advocate, but it was for my doc who came to me and said, hey, I need help.
Reflecting on your early days in law enforcement and the military, what were the primary challenges you faced, and how did you overcome those challenges?
Law enforcement and military are two separate challenges. I think military, it's when I was overseas fighting, I think that the challenges were quite apparent there was, I fought Al Qaeda before, I fought Taliban. They're two separate challenges. And the battlefield and always going through those training cycles, getting prepared, going over deploying. I think that the challenges were how much time I could spend at home, fearing whether or not I would make it back from deployment, just that fear and anxiety, all that from obviously the military side. But I think law enforcement, I think the challenge was a little bit different. I think that how can I help the Americans here? When you're military, you're not really looked on the inside. You don't look on the military or helping the citizens here. We were more worried about the threats overseas. When I was back here as law enforcement, I was focused in on trying to stop domestic violence a lot, or trying to help out families, stay together instead of break apart. How do I help, somebody who's got suicidal ideation, getting them to the hospital? These crazy scenarios. You never be ready for a law enforcement scenario. Like, everything's different on a daily basis. At least with military, things are structured to where you kind of know what's going to happen on a daily basis. Even if you're in a firefight, you kind of know, like, hey, you're fighting your enemy. Over here in law enforcement, you never know what kind of call you're going to get. You never know what's going to happen when you arrive on scene. It was a really interesting time frame, I'll tell you that. I learned a lot from both. And how I overcame it, I think law enforcement, the military side helped me overcome anything I faced. I think it's what kept me level-headed because, as I said, I was in really heavy firefights with Taliban. I think when I was back here in the United States, I never really had to unholster, but I've never really felt in any scenario I had that I needed to escalate, or I could literally talk myself out of situations where people wanted to be drunk at a bar and wanted to fight, outside. I de-escalated to be like, talk to them like a human, bring them back down. I think that military bearing and that military discipline kind of helped me out to be like, because it's funny because I would see other officers that never had that military side where they would just be like, they would be doing the most. They would go from 0 to 100. And here's me where I stay at 0 all the time, even in hectic situations where I'm just like, oh, okay, well, I don't know how to explain that kind of feeling. But military-wise, I think, it was always a purpose. It was always, what kept me going in the military was I would go, when I was in training, I would always go from breakfast to lunch to dinner, right? While you're going through all that pain of training. When I was overseas, I would go for a month of looking at different things from like a month to, hey, I'll be home maybe by December or whatever it is. But I would always kind of break it out to be like time that would get me through things. Because, as the Marines saying, is pain is always temporary. Right? So there's always an end to it.
What are the major differences do you feel when a person is directly coming to a job as a police officer and with a background of military and then coming to a job as a police officer?
I think it does them better. If you go from military to law enforcement, I think it better equips the officer rather than a kid who just goes through the law enforcement academy and then comes out. Like, I think you'll see a big difference on how they react to the community, how they respond to matters of high stress, even to just the way that they talk. Like we're always sir, ma'am. We're always very respectful while we're military types. And it's just hard to explain. There's just a lot that you can take away from military experience, especially if you're combat arms. If you're combat arms, like I was, which was infantry, in my experience in the sense of kicking down doors to being that 100% on the escalation scale of really fighting. We kind of understand this controlled chaos is what we would call it. Controlled chaos. We know how to de-escalate or escalate at any time, but there's not a need for that in the United States. And I'm going to be quite honest, there's not a need for that war fighting mentality though on the streets. But you always have it in the back of your head and you need to amp it up. And I think it also does help out with things like active shooter that we face quite a lot. I think that with military, you're more than well equipped to just run towards gunfire and go and save a bunch of children inside a building that are unfortunately being massacred by some sort of crazy shooter. And I think that the Nashville one was a great example. Those officers were prior veterans. They just put on their plate carriers and they just went straight into the building. They didn't even think twice. They just went in and saved people at the school. And I think that's just something that's kind of built into us, that drive. I don't know how to explain it. Besides, there's a lot to be said for officers who start off in the military and then come on over. It's just weird because I could say we know how to show up on time. And on time to us is 15 minutes early. You and I were talking about it earlier where you saw me kind of pop up really early. Like I'm always early to whatever it is because that military is ingrained in me. I always wake up at like 5 a.m. in the morning. I don't know why, but I'm always up there, always working out. I'm just extremely structured, and I think that also helps out with the officers as well, because I dealt with a lot of officers that weren't military. You could tell the difference between me and them. Like my haircut would be a certain way. I would get a haircut every week. I would have, certain standards with my uniform to where, like, if I felt my badge was a little bit off, I would so we were always like, there's just so much structure to discipline. And I think that really helps the police officers as well.
While working with Wings of Warriors, what hurdles did you encounter and how did you navigate these challenges to ensure the organization success?
We were able to tackle quite a lot of issues because at the time frame I dealt with Wings of Warriors, I was in New York City, and at that time Eric Adams wasn't mayor. He was the Brooklyn Borough Hall president. But I would sit down with the local municipality government and say, hey, we need to help veterans who are at like stage 2 cancer or stage 3 cancer or very serious illnesses be able to bypass these gigantic backlogs. The hospitals are so bogged up, the VA hospitals, that they wouldn't be able to get the care that they needed right then and there. So we needed to open up the ability for those veterans to get outside of that VA system and into privatized healthcare and get seen immediately so that they can save their own lives. I think that the bureaucracy and the red tape is what really hurt it. And I think we saw a lot of headway there in New York City that allowed those veterans to leave the VA system and get out into the privatized healthcare system and get seen. And we were getting more referrals out. We tried to expand that across the United States, and I was fighting battles in places like San Antonio, Texas. I would have a veteran call me from Minnesota, like, what can you do to help me get outside of the VA system? And we would go and we would battle with hospital advocates and say, hey, let this person go. Let this person go see this specialist over here in another state. And we would hand walk that veteran through that process to go get seen. I would have really great conversations with congressional members, so Senate as well as House, on different processes that were taking place and really trying to help out commanders understand the difference between PTSD and TBI, how to properly diagnose it so that the service members weren't being kicked out of the military because it became nuisances. We had a huge problem that led to Tyson Banker taking the Secretary of the Navy to court back in 2018. I kind of helped out with that process a little bit, where a lot of service members who exhibited symptoms of PTSD that contributed to adverse actions or getting hit with the UCMJ, and then they would get kicked out of the military. Well, they weren't abiding by what the previous Secretary of Defense put in place, which was, Secretary Chuck Hagel put a memorandum in place that said that service members needed to be screened for TBI or PTSD before getting kicked out of the military to see if that contributed to or was like the main contributor to their misconduct. The military was just kicking people out. They were like, oh, it's easier just to kick people out that had the PTSD and all this stuff. And Maker ended up winning that court case, by the way, and he ended up winning. And I would help out in the sense of the appellate court. So I would fight like the ABCMR, the NDRB and all that, and help veterans put together legal paperwork to fight for discharge upgrades or disability, retroactive disability, or awards that they thought they were supposed to get that wasn't given to them. And so that's where you'll see me, go down that route. Because I don't think there's a lot of people that understand it because it's a very complex realm. But once I learned how to navigate those processes, I was immediately sharing it with other veterans organizations as well as being one of the biggest champions for those veterans. And it didn't matter what era it was. I went all the way back to like Korea. I had a few World War II veterans as well, but I was out there fighting for thousands of different veterans to get what they needed. Yeah, that's the biggest significant transformation, was just seeing a bunch of advocates like me, just normal everyday advocates like me, just get out there and make that change things forward.
So how did you manage the transition from military service to civilian role, and particularly entering the non-profit sector after your service?
So I was actually serving side by side. So I was actually in the military still while I was dealing with this war. So I wasn't out of the military. So I would use my off time to carry out a chairman. I was even deployed to South Korea and was still doing veterans work while I was over there working in South Korea. So it's not like I transitioned from military to getting out and being a civilian CEO. I took over as I was getting out of the military. So I was still in when I took over the CEO role. That became a huge problem because I had to do my work and be the CEO at the same time. But I had a great board of directors and they really held down the organization. When I got out, as a CEO, I went from New York to Arizona to California to you name it, really kind of helping out veterans all over the place. Meanwhile, trying to go through grad school. So it was quite an interesting time frame. But I never really experienced just, getting out and then being a civilian CEO. I kind of merged into it from still being in the military.
So following your experience with Wings of Warrior, can you share an example of a significant transformation or change you were able to initiate either on personal or professional level?
I think the transformation or change that I was seeing, but it still has, I don't think that I can say that we've had a transformation or change yet within the veterans. I think that we're still facing the same issues as almost that I started off like 10, 12 years ago, to be quite honest. I do think it's getting a little bit better, but I don't think our politicians yet have really understood the effects of war or what's about to happen since, the ending of the war in 2024. It's one of the reasons why I'm running for office is to really get after veterans issues. I don't think we've seen a transformation or change yet. It's kind of sad to say that, but I don't think we've seen it.
So how do you think your work with Blacksit and Lexit has contributed to the transformation of political engagement and advocacy among minorities?
I'll have to backtrack a little bit. In 2016, most of the minority populists were Democrats that were out there where I was at least in New York. And it wasn't really popular to be this conservative mindset of minority. And I think that Brexit with Candace Owens and Brandon Tatum and all that kind of sparked a revolution amongst, a renaissance, as I would put it, amongst the Black community or minority community to come out and be bold enough to say, hey, I'm a Black conservative or I'm a Latino conservative, which was hard at the time frame when you had Donald Trump versus Hillary Clinton and all the divisiveness going on at that time. But I think that those two organizations help the minorities find a voice or find their voice and find the courage to speak up and say, you know what, I'm not necessarily a Democrat. I'm not necessarily left-leaning, and I'm more traditional values. I'm more about family. I'm more about faith. I'm more about limited government, small businesses, things that conservatives are known for, even pro-life and stuff like that. So I think that I can really sit back and appreciate Candace Owens for kind of being that individual that fell on the sword for us kind of thing, as well as President Trump at the time, as well as the Lexit leaders. There's been a bunch of Lexit leaders, so I can't just sit there and name one that was the best. But if it wasn't for those two movements, I don't think that the minority community would be so bold enough now to say, hey, look, I'm a conservative. Because I can't explain it exactly, but climate was not conducive to saying, hey, I'm a conservative. Even nowadays, it's very hard with the way the left reacts to any minority that comes out and says, hey, I'm more of a Republican than I am a Democrat. They lash out at us. They try to cancel us on social media. They try to come after our jobs. They try to, even LinkedIn banned me for 3 years for saying I was a Republican and then finally brought me back. But that's the kind of treatment we get as minorities. So I really kind of thank Brexit and Lexit for being those leaders that allowed us to find our voice and not be afraid to say what we needed to say.
So in your opinion, what fundamental transformations are necessary to better support veterans and their family across the country?
I think there needs to be a transformation on how politicians in DC tackle veterans issues or get after it. I think we need to stop putting every other country before our veterans. We need to stop putting every other issue before our veterans. I think that our veterans should absolutely come before anything. They're the only population in the United States that literally raised their right hand, and they swore an allegiance to the United States and signed a blank check. It's one of the only jobs where people literally die in preservation of our way of life, the Constitution, our defense of it, and making sure that everybody else can live freely. And until we find politicians that are willing to say, hey, I'm not going to spend 20 million over here for climate change in some random country and use that 20 million to somehow end veteran homelessness or help veterans transition back to American life after service or just things that were affecting our veteran population in general. I don't think that we'll see that transformation. That's why I'm trying to be that transformation. I'm trying to get into Congress to show veterans that there are people there that will put you first, that will fix the on-base housing, that our young soldiers are living in, to make sure there's not asbestos inside those buildings, or even the on-base housing where families are living, taking care of that, making sure that they're getting good food, good training, that our commanders are well equipped, getting whatever they need to carry out their missions or operations. Also on the VA side, making sure that the hospitals have everything that they need, making sure that our veterans have every resource available to them. And also, as I said, making sure that there's no homeless veterans. If we find a homeless veteran out on the street, that we find a way to get them housing, we get them jobs, we take care of them. And so I'm aiming to be that transformation.
So what ongoing challenges do you observe within the realms of public service and conservative advocacy, and how do you propose addressing these challenges?
I think there's a lot of challenges within the realms of public service and conservative advocacy. I think our government is so far off of the original intent of our family. A lot of public service, especially in the political realm, is about self-gratification, self-promoting, greed, corruption. There's just a lot of problems where these individuals act as if they're here for the people, but they only serve their special interests. They serve whatever corporate, donors, donate to their campaign or some form of PAC. And I think that the biggest challenge is that I'm going to face and that I currently face is I'm not about any of that. I don't care for it. I only care about what the people need. And I think that we have all these, and I think you understand what I mean. I mean, you look at from whether it's the executive branch to the legislative branch, even to the judiciary, majority of these people are fake. And I just got to be honest. They're just fake. And the challenge is to find people who actually give a damn about the American people and put forth legislation or policy or effective policy to help out all Americans, not the politicians' pockets. And I think that's the biggest challenge that I have right now in this realm is selling that to the people to say, hey, I am not a politician. I hate that name, a politician. I am just a pissed off veteran that wants to see America thrive, and I want to see the Americans as a whole just be able to raise their children, take care of them, and set forth a future generation that isn't going to have to suffer from our mistakes. And I think a lot of it has to do, as I said, with the current set of politicians we have in place. There's hardly any public service that I look at right now that I can say is honest and trustworthy, and I agree with the people. And I think that that conservative advocacy that I bring to the table, that conservative mindset of limited government, is one of the best ways of doing it. Government doesn't need to be involved in absolutely everything we do. Reduce the amount of government involvement in everything. Let the families, let the people thrive without us being involved in every little thing. Whether it's social media nowadays, whether it's a lot of the different tech stuff, whether it's even you hear it a lot with like guns, all that normal stuff, but just every day-to-day life. So the way I look at it is we need to get rid of these politicians that are all greedy about themselves and start placing people that are going to be about people, is ultimately what I'm trying to say.
Could you elaborate on a particular challenging movement or obstacle you faced during your tenure as CEO President of Wings of Warrior, and how did you handle it? Any particular incidents?
One of the hardest times I had when I was the CEO of President was going up against the ISAF. This is going to sound crazy, but I went up against the ISAF command, which is the International Security Forces Afghanistan command, and saying, hey, we need to help reduce the casualties that are happening overseas when it comes to IEDs or improvised explosive devices, and use proactive measures to kind of help identify IEDs and really kind of get after it, and as well as fill the urgent needs requests by the commanders that are out there, the Afghan commanders. And I remember having a huge back and forth with Senator Einhoff, who was out of Oklahoma at the time, as well as the Secretary of the Army's office and his legal counsel and all that stuff. And we had this gigantic thing of going back and forth of just trying to get after what we call the precursors of IEDs. So being able to trace elements. So like there was ways for us to identify or take off the battlefield certain things that would be components to making the bombs that would end up hurting us. And we wanted to be more proactive in that approach and say, hey, generals, there is this technology that we have to be able to detect when soldiers or Marines or whoever is going through villages to identify those materials made to use those or to make those bombs and use them against us. If we can take them off the battlefield, it kind of hinders the enemy's ability to do that. But it was just a giant mess. That was one of the toughest fights that I had. And then finding out that there was just a bunch of fraud, waste, and abuse. Them getting all the technology, but then just leaving it shelved and not using it.
So how do you navigate challenges associated with advocating conservative principles within minority communities?
I don't think that there's a whole lot of challenges, conservative mindset and minority. I think, and this is just my opinion, I think that most minorities are naturally conservative in nature. Whether I'm talking to the Black community, the Latino community, the various Indian communities, to Middle Eastern, Muslim communities, like you name it, most of us are minority, or not minorities, but most of us are conservative in nature. We are all about our family oriented. Most of us have, mother, father, grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle. We're all around us within probably a 5-mile radius, right? We all practice whatever religion it is. We all are very faith-based. We don't like government in our business. We are very business mindset. We're very, entrepreneurial. We all have our little small businesses. We're very much so also, we don't like taxes. We're not about big, white, sweeping taxation like the Democrat Party loves. We're more about lower the taxation, Milton Friedman approach, free market, capitalism. So we're not about socialism or Marxism or communism. So I don't really understand. I've always had these conversations with, let's say, more progressive minorities or liberal, and I'm always like shocked to look at them and say, how did you get there? How did you get there? Because you're the one that's off base with the culture, not the other way around. We tend to be very conservative. And I think that, you sit back and you look at how we got there, and I think that was a lot of media manipulation, whether it was mainstream media, CNNs, your MSNBCs, do you name it? Just the propaganda machines that are out there to kind of change the mentality to go away from our conservative principles to things that we would naturally not accept. And as I said, it doesn't matter what minority group that we're talking about. I think there's a set of principles where we're like, the Democrat Party is a little bit way off on who and what we are. So I think the challenges that I face is undoing the indoctrination or the stranglehold that the more progressive ideology has on our communities, because there's a lot of stuff they do that doesn't benefit us at all. The way that I look at it is like virtue signaling. Like there's a whole lot of virtue signaling. Like, let me hire this Black female, gay, and it's always like 5 or 6 different labels. And I'm like, okay, well, how did that help put food on our table? How did that help lower our taxes? How did that help our education? How did that help? There's just, a lot of things where I'm like, none of this does anything for us. And I think Disney was a good example of that recently. You had all the Disney losing dang near $1 billion+ of loss. And a lot of it had to deal with virtue signaling to minorities, where you got to have a minority or Black, female, as I said, gay for some reason, and all these other additional identifiers. And people are like, we just want to see a Disney princess. My daughter over here is like, I just want to see a Disney princess. I don't care about all the extra whatever. And I think that is the biggest challenge I face. Not only that, but the soft bigotry of low expectations is something that I've always faced as well. Is I believe that I'm good enough to compete on the merits of my resume, who I am, not based upon the color of my skin. And I think that has been one of the hardest challenges to fight against some of these ones who sit on the left in the minority community and want me to believe that I'm oppressed, that I'm some sort of victim of a bigger grand scheme. I'm chasing a ghost of some form of, institutionalized or systematic racism that I just frankly don't see existing in the United States. Do we have cases of it? Yes, we have cases, but I don't think that we have a mass scale institution or system that we're facing here in America that I need to constantly be afraid of and wake up in the morning and be like, oh my God, white supremacy is everywhere. I think that it comes down to conservative principles of hard work, put your head in the books. And we see this reflective in statistics between the Indian community is great at this when it comes to education. The Asian community is great when it comes to education. They're getting into Harvard, they're getting into all the Ivy Leagues, they're becoming doctors, engineers, you name it. And I'm like, why can't we replicate that in the Black community, the Latino community, or things like that, right? And we can learn from each other as different minorities to say, hey, how do we replicate the success that we're seeing? And to me, it has nothing to do with oppressed versus oppressor. It just has to deal with discipline. It has to deal with work ethic. It has to deal with family values, what parents are instilling into the children. Instead of being around or going around and partying and doing all that nonsense, keep your head in the books. Play sports. Do things that help benefit you or create the success that you need to get to an Ivy League institution if you want to go there, or become a military person, or I don't know, whatever your dreams are, you got to work. And I think that has been the hardest thing to advocate for when you have media, you have politicians, you have celebrities, you have all these organizations saying you'll never amount to anything, or you're oppressed, white people bad all the time. And I'm like, all this negative messaging hurts the mentality of the minority to be able to understand that if they just take advantage of the American dream, which is, work hard. Nothing's going to be handed to you. Keep your head in the books. Education is the key to success. And if you face an obstacle, you don't give up at the obstacle. You work your way around that obstacle. You work through that obstacle. Find mentors. Find people around you that will help you get through that obstacle, and you keep going. But the answer isn't to give up and just blame a form of an institution or a system or whatever. Like, I'm here. Shoot, if you have an obstacle, for anyone that watches this, I don't mind helping. We'll get through it together. But I think that is the biggest thing that I'm facing, is just, even with DE&I, the recent DE&I struggle, it's so annoying to hear we need to boost this amount of a certain color, rather than how about people compete based upon their resumes? How about people compete based upon their qualifications, and we remove that race factor from it, gender factor, whatever it is, but allow people to compete based upon the merit rather than what they look like or who they, choose to be in a relationship with. I don't know what's going on in America right now, but that's what is going on, sir, is this just craziness where I feel like slowly but surely we're getting people to come back to and gravitate towards common sense. But there's just so much emotion in America right now with all this identity politics that it's going to take a while to be able to get us back on an understanding that we don't need any of this virtue signaling. We're doing quite well as minorities. And if we embrace conservative values, we'll see a whole lot of success. We got to divorce ourselves from the government. And I don't mean because I'm anti-government thing. What I mean by that is more government means less success in your life. Less government means more independent, and you're doing more, or you're doing better, or you're having more successful life. The left loves to do this wide sweeping policies and create this dependence where you have to keep going back for I don't know what it is, welfare to, I call it the welfare state. And it's not just, SNAP, HUD or anything. It's just coming to the government for whatever you need. I believe that we should create our own wealth. We should separate from them and be like, if I need you, government, I'll ask for you. But I don't need, I understand you're there, but I don't need, and that's where you truly build that independence, that success, and that freedom. And that's something I'm trying to get across to the minority communities, that you don't want Big Daddy government breathing down your neck every 2 seconds. You want them off over here, and So I think that's my struggle.
So can you discuss the skills and perspectives gained from various roles, like military, law enforcement, non-profit leadership, and how they complemented each other during transactions?
I think from the military skills and perspectives, I think, again, being that young 17, 18-year-old kid going into the military, gaining that discipline, not only just mental discipline, but emotional discipline and all that, having people yell at you all the time, getting up in your face, doing certain things, you kind of build this tough exterior and interior, I guess. But not only that, but I think the way we learn things in the military, which a lot of people may not know this, but it's like cramming a semester's worth of knowledge into 2 to 3 weeks. and our ability to retain it really kind of helped as I was going through college. Like the way that the military helped or made us learn really kind of helped me navigate, the bachelor's degree and all that stuff, because I'd be able to be light years ahead of a lot of the students in there. The condensed courses that we do in the military, and you got to pass each test in the military at like 80%. So it's not like you get a chance to be a C student or whatever in the military. You're passing at like 80%, and then you got a hands-on practical application that's usually a go or no go. So you either pass it or you fail it. So it kind of helped me, and also helped me be more structured for college. And I think that once again, that helped me, both of those experiences kind of helped me deal with law enforcement as well, where I even took all that experience of being college educated, having military experience, but then being able to apply a lot of the experiences I had overseas into my day-to-day interactions with people in the community. It was almost like being out in a key leader engagement in the village in like the middle of Afghanistan. Every time I would go out in the middle of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, I'd be amongst all sorts of people in Tennessee, where you're always trying to be approachable to them, extremely nice, respectful to the people there, but know in the back of your head, like, yes, there's a safety issue that you can't let your guard down. But the way you portray yourself out there in the community will either make or break situations, or either escalate situations that only be escalated. And just understand that these people are human beings going about their daily American lives, and that we tend to respond to people's worst days, or we can sometimes be an inconvenience. If they got somewhere to go, but we're giving them a ticket. But it's all about the human interaction. And I think that a lot of that I learned from that military experience.
So what advice would you give to professional transitioning from military to law enforcement career to non-profit or political sector?
Military, law enforcement to nonprofit. As long as you have the same tenacity, same discipline, same work ethic as you've had in the military when you're opening the nonprofit realm, you'll be pretty successful. I think also if you understand the why, I think that military has a why. They understand, they have a purpose. We're very purpose driven. We're always getting after a certain commander's intent. If you kind of translate that to a nonprofit and say, hey, this is what my mission statement is, this is what my intent is, and you get after that, you're going to be very highly successful as a nonprofit leader. But you have to believe in the why. You have to believe in what your mission statement is and why you're doing it. And you got to be able to sell that. You got to be able to get out there and, talk to people and say, hey, this is why I'm running this nonprofit. And I think nobody's better to do it besides the veteran community. Very task oriented, very disciplined, and they're really, all around like selfless service. That's what nonprofits should be, is, the people that want to give back to the community. So I think that a lot of the values or institutional values in each of the branches of service that's instilled in people, the work ethic, discipline, it translates to what you're trying to accomplish on the nonprofit side of the house.
So what do you consider your most significant professional achievement till date?
I think my significant achievement is just being able to do all three of those: becoming a Marine, becoming a soldier, and becoming a law enforcement. I think that I don't know how many people can say they've done that in a lifetime. Usually people stick to one, but I think that having all three experiences is my greatest contribution. Achievement is being able to serve in three different capacities. Like, I think it's an honor to be able to do that, to be able to say, hey, I was a Marine, a soldier, and law enforcement as well. That's pretty awesome.
So what is the most important lesson you have learned throughout your journey, and how has it shaped your approach to leadership and advocacy?
I think the most important lessons, if I were to say, is lessons are only learned through failures, not necessarily all your accomplishments and what you're achieving. I think that you learn a lot through trial by fire. As I said, when I was a young Marine and learning how to become a leader and all that, there's certain things that I would fail at, but those lessons that you learn from that help you become the better leader. And then you kind of correct, and you do this self-improvement, and you learn from those, and then you're able to pass down lessons learned from your failures to those that you see that are making those mistakes that you once made when you were, young in leadership, and then you can better direct them. I think a lot of people that I've always come across in leadership, whenever they give these speeches and all that, they always talk about their successes, And that's the lessons that they learn from. The lessons are meant to be learned through failures in life, not necessarily your successes, because that's what makes you into the leader that you are now is not necessarily the successes I said, but more of the failures, learning and adapting and changing after you made that kind of mistake. Or because I know everybody here, and I'm pretty sure you can admit that people make mistakes, but it's how you bounce back from that, or how you adapt to that mistake that you made, or how you fixed it that made you into that better leader that you are now. So that's just the way I look at it. Is my most important lessons are coming from failures even throughout my career.
So, if you had one piece of advice for inspiring leaders in public service and conservative advocacy, what would that be?
My advice is, let's get back to the core, right? Let's get back to the core principles and values that America stands for. Let's get back to we the people. I keep having to talk about we the people. Understanding that it's not we the government, it's we the people. That your leaders or your politicians, they work for you, not the other way. And I think that we've gotten in a time frame where that is the complete opposite, where the politicians think that we're below us as the people, but that is not it. They work for us. Learn servant leadership, and what that really means to serve the people without really wanting anything in return. You're just doing it out of the kindness of your heart, or who you are as a person. I think that we live in a culture of what have you done for me lately, rather than what I can do for you. And I think that goes back to, Kennedy was another huge inspiration to me when he was talking about what we can do for this country, not the other way around mentality of what the country can do for you. That is my biggest advice to people, is once you start to learn that selflessness of saying, hey, let me better this country, and I'm not looking for anything in return, then you really kind of are leading the right way. You don't do it for profit, don't do it for greed, don't do it for, some sort of personal gain or anything like that. Do that for, obviously have your reasons for doing what you're doing, like whether it's, I want to better my family, I want to better this country, whatever it is, but don't do things for personal gain.
So, for individual pursuing career in public service or conservative advocacy, what advice do you have based on your experiences and challenges overcame?
Don't give up. There's a lot of people I come across where they start off as candidates, but then, they lose and they go away. But as I said, the biggest lessons you can learn are from failing at it. And just because you don't win an election doesn't mean that you haven't made some progress, or you haven't had anything you can pass on or take away from your experience. I think that a lot of people give up just because they didn't win an election, or they feel like people are not hearing their message. Keep up at it. Eventually, that hard work will pay off. You may not win the election still, but that hard work will pay off to where that message will start to resonate and start to carry. So it's all about, as I said, just my advice is just keep going with it. You win some, you lose some. As I keep saying in this political realm, you win some, you lose some. But what you can never do is give up. Keep working at those percentages. If you don't win an election, chip away at the percentage to get people closer to election. So that's just my advice to people.
So, how do you recommend aspiring leader in law enforcement or military roles prepare for transaction into non-profit or political areas?
I would say be prepared to go into the biggest, ugliest battlefield arena that does not carry the same kind of values and morals that you're used to having in the military or law. I think politics is one of the ugliest areas in the world, and my advice would be is safeguard and hold on to those values and those morals and everything that you had from the military to law enforcement as you come on over. Do not lose your way. I think that what people admire is that those morals and values that you have, because there's not a whole lot of it in politics. As I said, it's all about greed, corruption, everything else. And we are the ones that could be that shining light in politics to say, hey, let's get back to the sense of morals, values, and putting the people first. And so that's kind of my advice, is just hold on, clutch to your morals and values. Do not stray away from your moral compass that you've had throughout your service, and be that example for the other politicians to follow if you're going to get into this arena.
So, in your view, what are critical qualities or attributes necessary for effective leadership in advocating conservative values?
The critical qualities and attributes is just basic morals and values. And the want, it's almost like a calling, like a want to help people. And not because you want to help people for personal gain or anything like that, but you truly have a love of helping others. The other thing is being able to be objective in your thought process, being able to see that there are three sides to a coin. It's the same thing with three sides to a problem. The left will have their side, the right will have their side, but then there will be this middle ground that the truth lies somewhere in the middle. You're able to sit and listen to both sides, but you can come in and say, let's work on a common consensus here. Let's work on a solution that works for everybody. And just, as I said, the normal things that you have, the hard work ethic. And that's pretty much it I got for that. I mean, I think that they say critical qualities or attributes, as I said, it all comes down to morals and values. I think that's what most Americans are wanting to see from their politicians is just the basics of morals and values more so than hard work. If you're going to say something or do something, be a person of your word. Have integrity. Don't be corrupt. It's kind of sad that we have to break it down into basic values and attributes that you want to look for your politicians. But we kind of have to break it down Barney style and say, hey, just be the leader you're supposed to be. Do the right thing when nobody's looking.
So if you can distill your leadership philosophy into one guiding principle, what would that be?
Dream, inspire, execute. So three pillars of leadership is dream, inspire, execute. The dream factor is that we all, as children, we all start out with a dream, right? So we all want to be a doctor, a lawyer, an athlete, winning a Grammy someday. But it translates into my next part, which is inspire, which is it comes down to you need positive role models, you need mentors, you need people that you can look up to help you start turning that dream into motivation to get after it, seeking out knowledge, mentorship, tutors, things that will help you achieve that. But ultimately, the dream can only be accomplished if you execute. And that's why I have that last word so harsh, which is called execute. And that ultimately is no American dream can be accomplished unless you get after it and you work for what you want to accomplish in life. But that's putting your head in the books and getting good grades and getting good test scores and getting off to the universities that you want, or if you want to go to the military, putting in that work through boot camp or basic training, or if you want to become an entrepreneur, setting up those LLCs and doing everything you need to do, but you need to execute on whatever your dream is. Your dream will just sit there unless you go and do that work to make it happen. That's ultimately what I'm saying. So dream, inspire, execute are my principles.
So now it's rapid round, basically one word or a small answer round.
They said like one word.
So early morning person or night out?
I'm up early in the morning and I love staying up late at night.
So one word to describe your leadership style.
Selfless.
Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Most memorable achievement in your military service?
Being an advisor for the Afghan government.
Favorite luxury activity to unwind your busy schedule?
I think playing Modern Warfare 3.
The best piece of advice you have ever received?
Pretty much just never give up. I mean, I was go to my dad is just never give up on something that you want.
So if you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would that be and why?
I know this is going to sound very Republican-ish, but I would love to have a dinner with Frederick Douglass and just to kind of see what his thought process is on what the current state of the Republican Party and in politics is nowadays. So I'd love to see what he would have thought about that.
So the most rewarding aspect of your work with Wings of Warriors?
Being able to give back to veterans and being in that position to do so, and being able to see just the visible happiness and hope on their faces when I came in and was able to help them.
So what drives you to advocate for conservative values in minority communities?
I believe in and love the American people, and I believe that success comes with educating people on what potentially they could be, and I think that conservative values really help Americans achieve success.
So, one thing you wish you knew when you started your political journey.
How corrupt this would be, how crazy and like how much of a headache it would be.
Your preferred mode of relaxation, music, reading, or sports.
Music.
Great influence on your decisions to enter politics.
I think my greatest influence would be, it's going to sound crazy, but like Donald Trump.
The biggest challenge you foresee in your congressional campaign.
Fighting emotions versus fact. My opponent is very emotional, put out emotional clips and all that kind of stuff rather than debating on policy. So I have to fight emotional based campaign versus mine that's very logical, very policy based.
So your personal motto that guides your everyday life.
Semper Fidelis, always faithful, the Marine Corps motto.
So at last, one line that defines you.
But I always say strength through adversity. So pretty much meaning you fight through adversity, never give up on stuff.
So we extend our gratitude to Mr. David Winkler for sharing his invaluable insights and experiences today. His unwavering commitment to public service, advocacy for veterans' rights, and dedication to upholding conservative values serve as an inspiration. As David continues his journey to represent the people of Pennsylvania's 4th District, his leadership and passion for community welfare remains commendable traits deserving for recognition and support. We thank Mr. David for his time and look forward for witnessing the positive impact for his dedicated service. Thank you very much, sir, for your precious time.
Thank you.